You're listening to In-Fisherman Storyline, North America's top voice in multi-species freshwater angling.
Hey, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. This is a front porch edition of In-Fisherman Storyline. We're kicking off a new podcast, and everybody does a podcast now. So why us? Why In-Fisherman? Well, we have a plethora of stories. We have archives and archives and archives of tape and audio cassettes and so much stuff that excites me as an In-Fisherman employee, but also as a fishing fanatic. In-Fisherman made me, In-Fisherman molded me. And we have got an incredible list of content coming your way, and it's stuff that I think you're going to like. So why In-Fisherman podcast? Why In-Fisherman radio? Because we have some very unique experiences we're going to share with you guys. And this is the front porch edition. We've kind of created different buckets, if you will. We've got In-Fisherman hard copy, where we're going to talk about magazines and television shows. We'll do some previews. We'll do some just discussions with the editorial crew here in the building. We have In-Fisherman road trips. I kind of like that name. Todd Seisner, my boss, is like, we can think of a better one. That's going to be created, but then we'll take a portable podcast kit on the road, and we're filming In-Fisherman TV, and we'll get some inside looks at outfitters and guides, and maybe on a remote lake in Canada or Mexico or somewhere. We're going to talk about that lifestyle and share that with you too. And then we also have one we just cut the other night. It's called In-Fisherman After Hours. That's a PG-13 version of the state of the industry, and me and some local friends here get together. We all have some pretty strong opinions, and we're right on every one of them, and we want to share that with you. Make sure to tell you that we're right. But this one is a front porch edition, and what we're going to talk about are people that make this industry what it is. They're probably people you don't know a lot about. You've probably heard about them, or maybe heard some stories that is really about who they are. But we grabbed a couple of these guys. They're dudes I call my friends. I've been able to fish with one. I have yet to fish with the other, and they're coming in from opposite ends of the country, which makes this interesting. Our timing for this event was well, it's been a few months in the making, but at the very least, we've had to coordinate schedules. Here's who we got, and this is what's exciting. I've got Cullen Vieders. He's all the way out in New York, which is a long ways from our Minnesota headquarters here. He is the CEO and the big dog at Musky Candies Customs. He makes custom musky baits, and I have actually had an opportunity to test these lures. I have caught muskies on them, and I have to say, in my ridiculous, obsessed collection of musky lures, they are indeed the prettiest. However, if you're a musky fanatic like I am, your goal is to ruin every single musky lure that you have. And the more jacked up they are, the better the memories. And then on the other side of the country, in, I think, Denver, Colorado area, is my buddy, Allee. And Eric is the content marketing coordinator. Did I get that right, Eric?
Close enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I generally have a couple words mixed up there, but Eric he works with Eagle Claw Tackle, and Eagle Claw is a longstanding partner of In-Fisherman TV. But what I love about Eric, first of all, his beard, and Cullen, nothing against yours, you got a great beard, but Eric wears a beard like a big man does, so I dig that. But it looks good. You guys both are carrying that. Good for you. But Eric is what's the word, Eric? You are obsessed with the details. You love to tinker. You love to find what changes a subtle enhancement to a lure. How does that make the fish bite differently? You're a kayak fanatic. You love to bass fish. You love to crappie fish. But these two guys in their own right are outstanding anglers. And the accomplishments that they've had are long, especially Cullen's muskie we're going to talk about. But these are stories you've seen on infisherman.com. If you had an opportunity, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, please go look up these dudes, search their names. It'll bring up their story. A couple years ago, I'll start with Cullen and where he and I met. He caught a world record class muskie we're not going to give away too many details, but on the eastern edge of Lake Ontario, and a massive fish. And we ran that story. And actually, Cullen, it was one of our top performing stories of the year, but it was the number one fishing story to run on gameandfish.com. So it definitely carried some weight, and I'm using that pun intentionally. And then Eric, just this past year, it was December, I think. November, it caught a giant Colorado crappie. Ended up being the state record catch and release, and actually, and we can talk about this in detail, but I'm assuming it still likely would have been the state record no matter how, if it was kept or released. So These guys are big fish hunters and they're into details, and I like that. So we brought two guys that are different together. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to get their story. Um, I'm just excited you guys are here. Thanks for making the time for me on a Monday evening.
Yeah, super excited, and you were kind of talking about what I am as far as an angler, Thomas. I just want to reiterate, I'm an in-fisherman man. All the things, selective harvest, multiple species. I've been reading in fish since I was a kid. I'm always going to read it, and that kind of shaped the multi-species approach that I have, and the selective harvest approach that I have to fishing.
Well, listen, In-Fisherman has influenced so much of the country, and I think we're gonna really dig into those details in coming weeks and months. But I mean, Cullen, if you're a northern guy like we are, even though we're separated by thousands of miles, pretty much, you've had some influence from In-Fisherman, I would assume.
Definitely. I always had a subscription growing up. Always would be waiting for it to come in the mail every month. So to like look back now, it's a huge pleasure to be on here because it's, something you never thought would have happened.
Well, it did, and it happened in almost 60 inches. That's how we met. This fish that you caught, editor in chief Doug Stang, he passed along your contact information. You caught a ridiculous fish, and Eric, like you, again, we've talked about the opposites, but he released this fish, and unfortunately, in a situation like that, when you're dealing with an enormous fish that's sensitive to catch and release tactics and safe handling and things like that, Cullen made the right decision and put that fish back. And we'll never know if it was actually a world record or not. But in my mind, I mean, absolutely without a doubt, world class. So, Cullen, I want to hear that story. But let's start out with this is what I find especially fascinating. You are obsessed with details. You have so much commitment to the sport, to the lures that you develop, the Musky Candy custom baits. Talk me through a little bit about how that interest was formed and what part of your personality drives your ability to make those lures.
Um, so I know it's been like mentioned in the past, but growing up I struggled really bad with addiction and I found myself in plenty of bad situations, facilities, and not going in a very good place in life. Um, I always loved fishing growing up since I was about 4 or 5 years old. Grew up right on Lake Ontario. My parents, they always sailed a lot. So I would typically fish off the docks all day while they were, working on the boat or getting the boat ready to do whatever. And I remember my dad would like have to finally wrangle me in because I just wanted to stay out there and just keep fishing. So like I was obsessed with things from, a very young age. And as I got older and I got, started having troubles in life and all that, I got away from all of that. Um, the truth is, I actually ended up finding myself in multiple different facilities. And on the last one, Buffalo River ran behind it. And once you were on a certain phase, you were allowed to, go outside. You could come home on passes. And the one counselor there, he used to bass fish a ton and he'd take us over to fish in the creek. Well, it was like right back to like obsessed, like I love fishing again. So I'd always be bugging this guy, like, will you take us down there? Can we go fishing today? And he was pretty cool about it. Still talk to him from time to time. Still see him. Still talk to him from time to time. Still see him every once in a while. I'll bump into him, but he was a huge factor in getting me back into something positive that I could focus my energy into. And then basically once I started coming home, even if it was just normal college aged kids, like, what they're typically doing, and I couldn't be around it at that time. I just wasn't strong enough. So I basically just fished. Like I would come home on the weekends and I would just fish all day. I'd go to different spots I never tried before. I wanted to catch all kinds of different fish. Just basically totally obsessed with it. And then I actually got into muskie fishing. There was a guy I used to run with when, I was in my thing. He was older guy, goes by the name of Spaz, for a reason for sure. And he had gotten himself together for a while there, and he had this photo album of like all his best catches, or like lots of his fish he's caught over the years. And where I am in New York, like for like other than the Niagara River, like I live right out the window is Lake Ontario right here. And like the harbor I grew up in, how I grew up fishing was basically like all trout and salmon, from feet of water to, fishing the tributaries with center pins and, bottom bounce in the Niagara River. So when I saw the muskie, I was like, it's a muskie? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, where'd you catch that thing? And he told me about this little lake south of us about 2 hours. And I said, I want to catch one of those. So I remember we go in a canoe because that's all we had. We had like no money at the time. I had a spinning rod with some 30-pound braid on it and like, I don't know, a 50-pound steel leader or something like that. And I was throwing just a number five Meps, I think it was, in like a bright color. And I casted for like 6 hours. And finally I caught a muskie. And it was probably, I'd say, 32 inches. And right there, it was all over. Like it was done. Like it was flip the switch. And now we're just going to go crazy at this. And we started going down there a lot more and a lot more. Of course, in a canoe. And my main fishing partner is a guy by the name of John Pencil. He's like a brother to me. I still steelhead fished a lot, in the tributaries in the winter and when it was cold. And there's a little spot down by me, and I had this dialed based on like water clarity, how fast it was flowing, where the flow was coming through. Like I knew where those fish lived every morning. I used to fish it basically every single day, whether it was 10 degrees or whatever, breaking out ice chunks. And this guy, he crushed me the one day, and I'm like, they always eat this jig. Like, why are they eating his? And he'd like, the water was high, and I remember he would let his float get to like right in front of me, like 5 feet in front of me, while I'm in my waders on the sandbar, and all of a sudden, poof, and I hated this guy. I'm like, come on, dude. So, anyways, I'm like, what the hell you use? And he tells me, and I'm like, I knew it. It'd either be this or that. So, I saw him down in the harbor one time, um, just catching largemouth and stuff. And I love catching pike too. A lot of the bays and tributaries of Lake Ontario at times, you can get like nothing absolutely crazy, but I've caught in some like 40-inch pike out of them. And I'll throw like up to 8-inch phantoms, 8-inch grandmas. I've thrown bulldogs for them and done really well. And I was throwing, it was the spring, I was throwing like a little 6-inch shiner grandma, and he's like, what is that, a muskie bait? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just fishing for pike though. I was like, I do fish for muskies, like, down south in these lakes or whatever. And he's like, I've never caught one. And then he shows me a picture of one, and at this time the lake that I fished is full of muskies. It still is, but like you might catch 140-incher for every 100. Like it is full of these little tiny muskies. And he shows me a picture of this like 47-incher. At the time, I think my biggest was like a 40-incher. And I'm like, where'd you catch that? And he caught it bass fishing on a little shad rip. And I'm like, come on, dude.
Oh yeah.
So, anyways,
That's
we start fishing a lot more together, mostly steelhead and stuff. And at this time they changed the rules because we crushed it for a long time. There's a big tournament around here called the Lock Tournament, and it's a trout and salmon tournament. There's like brown trout division, lake trout, steelhead. There is a walleye actually in there, salmon. And the Niagara River, the spot we used to fish, like obviously the boats, like it go into like June. The boats, as far as salmon and stuff, they're getting them, down rigging. But we had a spot where the water was still really cold, and all these big steelhead would stack up on it, and we'd float fish it. And we had won multiple times, or like got fish of the day, just from shore. And the charter boats couldn't get to this spot. So he had a little duck boat that he used for duck hunting. We win this tournament from shore, the steelhead division of the slog tournament, and we go buy a bunch of new musky stuff. And we were like, I'm talking dead broke. So like being able to like go buy your 7.5 foot gander mountain muskie rod and like three
Yeah.
depth raiders and like some Meps muskie killers, like we felt like we were balling. And
Cullen, I have in my garage a couple of those Gander Mountain muskie rods to this day. I
yeah,
still have those.
I love them.
They were great rods and
Yeah.
they are totally functional.
I had an 8.5 foot one at one point that I actually loved. So we went to these little lakes that I knew about. He catches muskie, he's starting to like it. And then he's the kind of dude that once he starts doing something, like he's not, doing it halfway. Like if this guy were to ever start ice fishing, he'd have like every electronic, like the craziest hut, like everything you can imagine within like 2 weeks. It's just how he is. So we start going to, he's like, we got to start fishing the Niagara. Like we don't want to keep catching babies. So me and this, me and my buddy there, Pencil, we go out in the duck boat, 14-foot duck boat. We got no fish finder, no anything. We just go based on like, primitive fishing knowledge of where you think the fish would sit based on structure and, stuff like that. And we actually encountered multiple muskies like the first time. And I think I lost one that ate a red October tube right at the boat, and he got one like jerk trolling a depth raider along this wall. So we like start fishing there more and more, and we're intercepting fish almost every time. Just nothing crazy yet. And then we still remember like our first 40 incher, the first 45 incher, the first 50 incher. Um, and then like I said, he's that type of guy. Within like not long, he got a tracker. We did away with the duck boat. I bought the duck boat and kept fishing out of that. And it was crazy. I used to be out in that duck boat in the middle of the Niagara River at night in December. I caught 50 inches out of that thing. I had it for a few years. And, we kept fishing more and
Hey,
more. We
hold
started.
on, hold on. I got to tell you this. And this is fresh in my mind, Colin.
Okay.
My first boat was a double wide, double deep 14-foot duck boat. I bought it for $200 and it
Wow,
had a tree growing out of it.
awesome.
It was brutal. And I think I probably spent less than $500 getting the motor running. I added some casting decks, kind of created a make-believe bass boat.
That's basically
And
what I did.
this dude, listen, it's what I could afford.
Yeah.
I begged the guy to sell it to me. And he's like, well, I'm not taking any of your money, and I'm like, well, I'm glad I did, but true story, true story. So the very first muskie trip that I took it on, I took I don't know what the color combo is, but it's that super hot orange Magnum Rapala. So, it's like
Okay.
a,
Yeah, I know
oh,
exactly what you're talking.
7 inch, the deep metal lip, right?
Yeah,
It runs 20 feet or better.
yeah, I know exactly
And
what you're talking about.
I was trolling, okay, holding a rod with a tiller handle. I mean, I can't even replicate it. And that fish hit so hard the motor bog,
Oh God.
you could hear the motor struggle. Ended up being a 50 incher was
Wow.
my first muskie out of that
Wow.
boat. I'd have to dig the picture up, but there the whole point is like I think there is a element of fishing romance in a crappie boat that
Oh
you
yeah.
almost have to have. Eric's going to tell a similar story, I promise you, but
Yeah.
there's something special about that. So carry on.
I'm gonna keep it real. I've seen guys with the best gear and they had the money and best boats and they just lack common fishing skills and like reasoning. It's
Well,
just the truth, and some people don't like to hear that, but it's true.
the fish don't care.
Yeah. And so we start doing some different stuff, trying new stuff, and this is what I found you run into a lot nowadays. Um, Anybody can basically just ask somebody or go on the internet and oh, this is how they fish that, this is how they do this, and like nobody wants to try anything new typically. They just want to piggyback off what the guy before him did. I will say that when me and him started fishing the Niagara River, we just like figured basically everything we knew trial and error. I mean, there was a few things once we started getting into night trolling. There was a guy, Larry Jones, who gave us some tips, obviously, like, and helped us a lot. I'm not going to deny that, but like, we tried everything. Like, I mean, crazy stuff. And I've caught some fish over the years doing some things that are way out of the box. And caught some huge fish doing it for sure. I kind of like, even with certain tactics that you just know is traditional for an area, I like to find, you know, different things that you can incorporate in it or try and, is that the truth? Where I caught that fish, people told me you had to have your baits back a mile, that you had to have a huge bait, and that's definitely not the case. Um, I think people come to assumptions based on things that aren't necessarily fact sometimes, or they hear something and then they repeat that. For me, and I'm sure my partner would agree, the best things I've ever found is figuring new things out for yourself or putting your own twist on it. If you can use the proper logic in reasoning, and like, you have that ability almost like a sixth sense when it comes to fishing, you will do better. Because if you just do the exact same thing everybody else did, you're never going to even do as good as they did, because they've already started to wear that stuff out. So if you're not trying something
You're
new,
going to
if
be
you're not,
average, and
yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I
yep,
think that's it, and Eric has said that same thing to me in the last 24 hours. There's something incredibly valuable about, um, finding your own way, and I think I had this conversation with some guys here last week about, you know, if so and so gives you their waypoints, I mean, that sounds good. You covet
y-
them, right? You block them. I've got all my waypoints backed up on 2 or 3 different SD cards in
yeah,
my gun safe. So, I have value in that, but if I were to give those to you or anybody, they'd be like, "Well, okay, the fish may not be there that day," or
yeah.
the exact, bait, rod, and reel combination may not be the secret. So, there's a super undeniable value in, and I've talked about this for years, in time on the water. You cannot beat
Yeah.
going out there, being a student, being curious, right? You guys have both said that to me. You're super curious about the fish you pursue, and figuring out a way in your style to make those fish eat. And Cullen, this is where the rubber meets the road with my perception of you is I can tell that you are a student of muskies. You have to be. You got to be a little crazy too,
Oh,
and
I'm
we
definitely
got that covered
crazy. You can ask anybody
for
that knows
sure.
that.
That's right. But you found your own way, and you decided to give those fish something that nobody had ever seen until you started musky fishing and then developed Musky Candies baits. And I want you to talk about that transition here, but I'm going to tell you right now, I took a couple of Cullen's baits this last fall. I had the opportunity to go to Lake of the Woods the last week of October. It's one of my favorite trips I've ever done in my entire life. We stayed at Uncle Mark's Outpost, and that's the Jay Siemens cabin that he and his crew built on a remote island in Lake of the Woods, not too far from Kenora, Ontario. And the fishing, as musky fishing goes, it's never fast and furious, although you do have days like that on perhaps the St. Clair or Lake of the Woods. But I took a handful of his baits. Every rod I had on my boat had a Musky Candies bait on it, and even though the fishing was slow, we still caught 3 fish and a number of giant pike, by the way, on the lures that you sent. And I wish, and Colin, I know we've talked about this, I had GoPros running for about the first hour and a half of each morning, but the air temperature was hovering in that 28 to 32 range, and GoPros just
Yeah.
they don't handle that. So I wasn't able to get the video footage I wanted, but I can tell you people, if you're listening to me right now, if you want a custom bait that was designed by a guy that gives a giant care about your success on the water in every detail that that bait has, look up Musky Candies Customs on Facebook. And I'm not giving a shameless plug. Like, I mean this. These are fantastic baits, and they look so good, you're not going to want to use them. But Cullen, tell me about why that happened for you. Why did you decide to make a lure, and then all of a sudden you're making these lures you don't go to Walmart and pick these up. You got to custom order them. So talk about that.
Um, so like I said, anytime I ever like something, I'm passionate about it. I get interested in it. I typically take it way overboard, and I've had times in life where it was in extremely negative ways too. But I found if you can channel that into like good things, um, you can maybe take things to a level or think about things differently than somebody else um might not. So I always tied my own steelhead jigs and stuff. Me and me and John would always have these little jig tying parties and always liked doing stuff like that, anything involved with fishing. And at one point I like decided I wanted to start making some musky baits. And it's funny because like at first, I mean, I was buying shovels and cutting off the handles and dowels, and these things I'm talking were the most atrocious things in the world. I was gluing two pieces of Lexan together, using hanger for wire, um, spray painting them, and I ended up actually, you probably can't see it, but I drilled through. Yeah, you can. Hold on. There you go. I drilled through my hand right there one time. Almost went into
Oh
shock
wow, I see
death
it.
now. So I am not a woodworker. So I was going to school at University of Buffalo for health and human services, because I wanted to work in addictions. And I actually did ended up starting an internship at a facility I was at 10 years prior. But I also started while I was in school researching, like, so I'm going to say Brian Boyer of Legend Lures, huge inspiration, and a lot of, my painting style, the bait. There's a few guys, Zach Baker, Lydia of Blue Waters. They're probably like my biggest inspirations as far as like paint technique. And if you really look at some of like the paint jobs, you can almost see like a combination of Baker, Blue Water, and Legend in there. Like I like to incorporate. There's certain things I liked from each of those guys that I wanted to be able to do myself. But I started researching because on the Niagara River, Buffalo Harbor, especially in its heyday, Legend Plow, Legend Perch Bait, those were like, I'm talking like that's what you used. And I mean everywhere. Like if you really know like the history, the amount of like actual 50-pound fish caught on a perch bait or a plow is unbelievable. And so I kind of like, I used perch baits. Some of our best baits were an Ernie, which actually I'll explain the story at some point. The Shiner Ernie is what influenced this. Depth Raiders, that was basically what we ran, especially, night trolling. And I started researching different types of urethanes, and, maybe I could make molds and stuff like that. So I kind of came up with like a rough template. I did it with multiple different styles of baits. I probably wasted so much money on, baits that just weren't good. And resins that sunk and, were so dense that they didn't get the action and all kinds of stuff. But the thing was, I was so obsessed with it, I was gonna figure it out, and I had late classes. At the time, I wasn't taking like a crazy amount of classes, and they were late. So I'm talking, I was still staying with my parents, I believe, at this point. And I would stay downstairs, and I had this little corner. It was all on the floor, and I would like all night till like 5 in the morning. I'd be just trying to come up with different shapes, different paint, like different ways to paint, all that stuff. And finally, I did make like a good prototype, and I kind of painted it like that Shiner Ernie because I knew it worked. And it started catching a lot of fish, and it was almost like it was shutting down the other baits around it. Like all of a sudden, they were only eating that one.
But Eric, the one of the things that you've talked about, I know we're going to get out of a step a little bit here, but you were constantly triggering with baits, and the same thing that Cullen was talking about was bait action, was bait performance, was bait. We'll call it perception, like the colors. And I know that you're not above pulling a spinnerbait blade off and trying a different color or shape or whatever, but you like the skirt or whatever. But I know that you tie a lot of your own jigs. You tie a lot of those the hover presentation, the hover
Mhm.
bait that we've talked about. Why are guys like you and Cullen and I'm not. I guess I need to learn something. So attentive to those details. What is that obsession like on your end?
So I got to go back a little bit to a couple of things that he said, just because I was enjoying myself so much. We talk all the time on the phone. I'm never this quiet. But one of the things, talking about gear and stuff like that, like you can't buy, no matter how much money you have, no matter how many resources you have, you cannot buy obsession, right? And when you
That's right.
get that obsession, you no longer are comfortable or willing to walk down the same path that somebody else has walked, because you know where it goes, right? So
That's
by
right.
the little tinkering stuff that we do, and there's different degrees of it, right? Like I tank test a lot of stuff in a little aquarium that I have, just so I know exactly how it sits when it's in front of a fish. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But it's that thing. It's the, I don't want your, this is going to sound like I've got the biggest ego in the world. It's, I don't mean it that way, but like I don't want to go where you go. And when I say you, I'm talking about following the path. You know what I mean? Like one of the things that I've always done with all the content that I've consumed, and that's a buzzword now, but before it was like, how many of us had stacks of magazines next to our bed,
Hmm.
and you would read it,
Hmm.
you would consume everything that you could, but you didn't follow it necessarily, exactly the same. What you did is you used it as a reference point, uh, standing on the shoulder of a giant to go further.
To personalize, yeah,
Hmm.
to be your own person, and I think that fishing is so personal, and I could go into a diatribe for 20 minutes about how the personalization, the unique components of everybody's angling experience sets them apart. And a prime example, and I'm just going to use this. We're going to dig into this in a little later here, but if you look at the way the professional tournament world is, and we'll use bass fishing as an example, but that applies to muskies, to crappies, to catfish, to walleyes and bass, of course. So what gives the fan base a leg to stand on with their opinion is their personal involvement in their own time. Name another sport, Cullen, Eric, that you can do throughout your entire life that has a professional component to it. I don't know that there is any. Golf, maybe, but even that has its physical limitations as you get
Hmm.
older. So fishing is really kind of the example of the ultimate fantasy sport that you can look at the pros doing and saying, I could do that. But the truth is, these guys at the top level are so good, and I will stand behind that vehemently. They are naturally talented. It's not something you can just go out and do, but they do set a precedent. They do set an example, and they give you an opportunity of something to aspire to. And it doesn't matter what age you are, you can, in Colin's case, turn your life around because of fishing. My life was molded because of fishing. Eric, you're the same way. And Cullen, unfortunately, his bladder was shifted to where he has to stop mid podcast and go to the bathroom. But that's okay. And you know what? I'm going to make fun of you for that, and you'll probably rip my arms off later and beat me to death with them. But why don't you finish up with that, because we were going somewhere pretty cool about your desire to perfect and stray off the course. I'll give it back to you.
Um, so, we started catching, more and more fish on them. And I never had this plan. I never advertised it really. I just thought it would be the coolest thing ever. And I kind of did tailor my stuff to like where I was fishing and certain things that I wanted it to do, like, maybe a little more. Like, I wanted this to thump really hard. I wanted it to get deep quick. Because this was basically the first real bait that I started having a lot of success on. And then I knew a lot of guys through fishing, the internet forums, Facebook pages. And I know a guy who was a full-time bait maker in Canada. And, he asked if he could get a few of them. And I mean, at the time, like, they were still like horrendous. Like, my fire tiger was not fire tiger. And this guy like started buying dozens of them and like having me paint these crazy colors. And it was almost like he saw that I was going to do this far before like I ever even had that thought. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, you could just go buy this bait or that bait, like, but I'll do them. And my process was not what it is today. I was making like 12 baits every 2 weeks, maybe. And I started, he gave one of his buddies one of my baits, took it to Lake Nipissing. I remember that was the first 50 incher. and it was like the greatest thing ever. And like still till this day, like when I know somebody caught a giant on one of my baits, like it is like I feel like I was there catching that fish too. Like it's such a good feeling to know that, in some way you contributed to that. And that's why I do it. I mean, obviously, I did at a point where I have to make a living so I could survive, but like that was never the intent. And that's not where I get my satisfaction. It's when somebody, says like it was tough, but we got, three fish. They all ate this is called a sniper. They ate the sniper. Um, so that's still
Cullen,
till
I got to tell you, I got to tell you about that. So when I was in Canada this last fall, so my son Tommy is, you'll remember this age well. I do, Eric. I'm sure you do. He was 15, about to be 16, and he'd always heard me talk about a fall trip or early winter trip to Lake of the Woods, and I grew up. I mean, a little kid when my dad bought me my first In-Fisherman tape. I was in 5th grade. And in that tape, there was a muskie segment, and there was some stuff that just totally blew me away. I told Dad, I said, I want to catch one of those. He's like, good luck. I'll never forget that. But getting Tommy on this trip, his uncle, my brother-in-law went, a couple of really close family friends. Tommy was familiar with every dude, so he went with 5 adult dudes, and he just wanted to catch one. And I knew that it was going to be tough, and so we actually the whole first day we didn't catch a muskie, which surprise, right? Muskies are pricks that way, but hashtag not sorry. There's an element of mystique and adventure that occurs when you get into wilderness musky waters. There is an element of, am I going to knock my lower unit off today? Is the map right? Are the fish going to be where they're supposed to be? There's all the things that we run through as musky anglers, but Tommy was up first, and I didn't give him that right. In fact, I told him, you'll ask him this if you need to. He said, Dad, I'll wait until everyone else has caught one to catch one. And I said, buddy, we'll let everyone else decide. Well, the guy that I was in the boat that day with said, Tommy, you're up first. And it was day 2. We were going off this 24-foot shoal in the middle of 60 to 80 feet. The rod went off, and Tommy just happened to be standing right by it. So even if he wanted to pass it off, there was no way for him to do it. He picked the rod up, set the hook, reeled the fish in, and I'm sure there's a picture Marshall will run over this when this thing is hitting the airwaves, but his smile was, and I sent you the picture. He and I are with a 42-inch fish. It's not a giant, but it's his first fall wilderness trolling muskie, something that he knows I was passionate about, had to take him along. I took him out of school. His grades suffered, Eric. I know you can understand this as a dad of a boy, but he got a D last year because of that trip. I got on him for totally worth it, but I was a bad dad. I'm like, I'm not even mad about it. Just don't do it again. The reality is that moment is one I know he'll never forget. And that came on a bait that you sent me. And bro, like, I want to send it to you and have you sign it, because there's something special about that moment that I got to have with my son. A dream trip for me, bro. I'm serious. I'm choking up. It was so special. And I knew that lure had your hands on it. It had your perception. It had your vision. It had your passion written all over it. And I could have cared less if that fish was 30 inches or 56 or 69 or whatever the heck your stupid fish was. It was a memory that he and I will remember a lifetime. I mean that. They're that good. They're worth going in a glass case, bro. Like that. Now, I did lose one of those things. I don't want to tell you about that. I snagged one up and there it went. But the bottom line is, when you put your time and your concern and your care and your passion into something, other people can feel it. And I mean, that's so important.
There's so many different things where, this might be a little off the cuff, and to use one of Thomas's things, sorry, not sorry. You go to iCast and you go to these different places, and you realize if you are obsessed like the three of us are, you're on an island a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You really are. When you want to talk fishing with somebody beyond a certain level, the pool of people that you can truly speak to is small. Okay, then you add sentiment and feelings and stuff like that into that pool of already small people. It gets even smaller.
Yeah.
But the things that I'm listening to in this podcast, where I'm the audience right now, I can't help it because I'm enjoying myself so much. But the idea of connection and all the things that Thomas you talked about with Tommy, and that the passion that's in the baits and everything. I gotta be honest, it doesn't feel
It feels custom is
industry.
what it feels
It
like, and
feels
that to
real,
me
and I really like that.
is a Cullen Vieders story, and it's the Musky Candy story. And the one thing we haven't talked about, and I want you to mention this because I have something to say about it, are the price of these baits. You're not just going to Walmart and spending $12 on something. You're paying a premium. What you're getting is fingerprints. You're getting
Yeah.
well, that's a wrong word because you don't put fingerprints on your clear coat, but you're getting your touch, you're getting your perception, you're getting your passion that's all over that bait. And the cool thing is, like, I think you sent me 5, 6, or 7 lures, Cullen, and every one of them ran perfect. And I did just test them just so I knew if I needed to run one on the left side of the boat or the right side of the boat, I wanted to make sure I had it right. They were true every time. So,
Yeah.
how do you not lose your passion for this by continuing down this path of building custom musky baits? Because
That
you have to make your living.
that's one thing is I do still every batch I go and cast tune, even like I'll have to find like a little spot in between ice chunks in a harbor, and sometimes it's so hard, or like I've had times where it was so cold where I would tell the customer, hey, listen, I usually, these baits, because they can, some of them, especially like maybe a deep jointed, can be very finicky. Um, I'll tell them, like, listen, I usually always tune these things, but like, I can't find any open water right now, and I can either send them if you think you can tune them or are cool with that, or I'm gonna wait, but I'm gonna tell you that. I noticed for me because you know I'm super grateful that I'm able to do this. I love it. I still do have a huge passion for it, but like I can't say, that there's not times where I look at, a bunch of half done perch patterns hanging and I'm just like, God, I still got to do all the scale and the stripes on those. Like it's just the base colors when you've painted them, 10,000 times. So I noticed that
Hmm.
adding new things, trying new things like different patterns, incorporating, maybe different glitter or different hologram, just making up new patterns. A lot of my patterns are spins on classic fish catching patterns, and I might just like exaggerate something in it. And I found a lot of times that just, because you already have that, like it's a proven color, it goes, and now you just like changed it up a little bit. For instance, I know Night Shiner is a very good pattern on a lot of big fish waters. Well, if you look at that, it's almost like just like a souped up Night Shiner with hollow. And if they've seen a regular Night Shiner, 27,000 times, and then maybe that comes through, it could make a difference. Just something a little different. But yeah, it's weird. I get in these modes, and you could ask, people that know me really well, especially at this time of year. It's like I'll know that I need to take a day off so badly, and I just don't know
Hmm.
how. Like I can't. It, it
But that's a part of the mystique. I think that's part of your. I wouldn't. I would certainly say take a day off. I'm due a couple days off. If you want to get down to it, but you gotta remind yourself why you do it. I've been in the industry for 19 years, and I have run into brick walls. I have. There's still the job part of this. It's easy
oh
for
yeah,
any outsider to say, "Oh, you got a dream gig.
all the
Oh, you fish all the time." Not true. You make a lot of really cool baits. You make the best hooks in the business, right? Roll Tide. You got to save some time for yourself because there are components to every job that people may not know about or appreciate that essentially illustrate the job component of that, and you have to take care of yourself. I believe that. I believe that for Eric. I believe that for you. But the bottom line is, if you're if my passion ever starts to slip, if I decide this isn't what I need to do, I'm not going to keep doing it for the sake of making a paycheck because I didn't get into this
no,
business to get
no
rich.
way.
I got in this business to live richly. And I think that the three of us, I know Eric's going to talk about that in a second, really illustrate what it means to work in the fishing business. And Cullen, uh, listen, it sounds to me like it saved your life. And
Oh,
that's
for
one
sure,
of the greatest parts about your story.
100%. Definitely.
Well,
There was a lot of people that didn't think I'd make it past 22 for sure.
Yeah, there's the addiction side of it. There's commonalities with me as well, and the obsession and not being able to turn it off.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't, no matter what. You know what I mean? Like I can do my best to try. You know what I mean, to turn it off or whatever. But it's just, even when I try
Yeah, I'm
to
the
turn it off, because
same way.
yeah, that you just, it's that thing, and it sounds like we're very similar in a number of ways, because it doesn't matter. You know, fishing's always been the mainstay my
Yeah.
whole entire life since I was knee high to a grasshopper. But the other day, this is gonna go off the rails for a second, but the other day, me and the
Pickleball.
wife, we went to play paddleball.
You would
I
be
think
good
no
at
pickleball.
pickleball. I bet $100 you could
I'm
win a
not
pickleball
normal,
tournament.
so
I
it went
would.
from, oh, this is a nice.
It's a
I'm not
thing.
lying to you when I looked at professional pickleball for people my age. I was about to go off the rails insane. And it's one of those things to where I don't have halfway. That's why I have to monitor the things I bring in my life,
Yep.
because I have 0 or 100, and
Yep.
there is nothing in between. And
Yeah, but
I
see,
just don't
even that,
think I
Eric,
have
has
that gear, and I don't
pushed
think I ever will.
your desire to learn, your desire to educate, and even from the moment I've met you, like I've not known both you guys for a long time, but I've known you long enough that if we're in the boat together, we're having a hell
Mhm.
of a day. We're gonna have a lot of great conversation. When the day's over, that's gonna carry on because we live and breathe by this sport, and our dedication to making it that way for somebody else is super important. Eric is a student for hooks. He works at Eagle Claw. If you ask him anything about hooks, Cullen, he's going to know the answer to it. And if you want to learn about muskies, give Cullen a call. If you want to talk about writing a story that, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. I want people to learn and grow because I care so much about this sport. And my son may not go on to work in the fishing business, but what I want out of my career and the impact it has on my boy is that he needs to value hard work. He needs to value what it means to have good influence in your life and what it means to other people with your day-to-day behavior. And I'm a good example on both sides of that spectrum, but I do want anybody that reads my work, anybody that grabs a Musky Candies bait, or anybody that buys Eagle Claw hooks to know that there are people behind those brands that we're not just robots. We're not just people that show up on Monday and can't wait to leave Friday afternoon at 5. We are guys, we are human beings that care about the sport, and ultimately our goal is to make everybody else better on the water, to have more experiences, to create a memory like I made with Tommy when we cranked in that first musky Cullen at Lake of the Woods. Have those memories that last a lifetime, because it literally drives me out of bed in the morning to have more experiences like that with my son. And uh,
Yeah.
so your fish, Cullen, and I'm gonna put you on hold for that, because at the end of this thing, we're gonna talk about the fish you caught. We're already pushing an hour because this is so good, and I promise anybody listening,
Okay.
the time is passing as fast for you as it is for us. But I'm gonna hand this over to Eric a little bit now, because when we're done with our where we came from stories, I want to talk about your accomplishment stories. And so, Cullen, your world record class muskie, we are going to get into. We're going to talk about those details and that lure you had in your hands. But Eric, I want you to tell a little bit about your story and how you. I love this part because you were kind of a content curator before you became a mad hook scientist. And by mad, I mean you're freaking crazy
Mhm.
about these hooks. You know part numbers. I have a whole plethora of hook packs on my
Yeah.
coffee table in my man cave right now, trying to memorize the numbers like you do. I'm not doing very well. So where did you build your passion from?
Oh, that's hard, dude. It's like my first memories. I know that a little bit might sound like a cop out, because there's some people that, they start with this, they start with that. It's always been fishing for me since I was real little. And when I'm talking real little, I'm talking knee high to a grasshopper. But I sucked. Okay, and I sucked for a long time. Uh, I remember, I want to say I was like 8 or 9 years old. We used to go fish it was trout fishing. We were fishing the Big Thompson. No surprise there for a Colorado kid, but I would get my butt kicked for a week, and then my dad would take his poor little kid to the trout farm, and I would catch a fish at the trout farm, and I never was satisfied with it. I was never happy with it. And it was the year after that that I decided that you're not taking me to the trout farm. I'm done. I might not catch anything, but I'm not going to that stupid trout farm. It took a week for me to catch a single rainbow, which, I mean, not the hardest thing in the world, but when you don't have a knowledge base and you're my family loved fishing, but they loved the camaraderie in the beer part of fishing more than the catching, right? So um it when it really took a hold is probably like 10 years old, where it was I always loved it, but I wasn't good at it. 10 years old, it was everything, absolutely everything. There was nothing else. I played sports, and I was good. I always went to practice and stuff until I knew the bite was good, and then I would, I would get a fever right before I had to go to practice, and I'd sneak away to the pond or whatever. Um, but a monumental time in my life that started shaping how I viewed things differently is, when you fish with your elders in your family, um, you kind of pattered them a little bit, and I realized I want to say I was 10, dude. I'm so old that it gets kind of cloudy, but I was like, there's Uncle Jim's spot, there's my grandpa's spot, there's my grandma's spot. Where's my spot? And I realized that I didn't want to fish where there was people, so I started walking down the river. That entailed going across fences and getting into some private property and stuff like that. And I actually found it was a super cool. It was a bend in the river. It doesn't matter if you trout fish or not. You could see this spot in the river was money. Um, and there was an old guy that lived across the way. He would point to me and tell me where to cast. And initially I was mad at him. I was like, dude, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, I walked all this way. I don't want to be baby birded into my fish here. But started whacking them. In those days, what'd you do when you caught fish? You bonked it on the head, you put it on a stringer, and you go back to your family like you're a hero. Something clicked in my brain with that, with getting away from people. Now, I wish it was cool. The story was like I just found the fish on my own. There wasn't an old guy that legitimately was pointing, cast right here. But from that, well, true. But but from that point on, it was like, okay, going back to what Cullen was saying, like, I don't even my own family, I don't want to walk down the path that they created. I want to find my own way. And it just kept extending and extending. And it was, I got heavy into bass fishing. Actually heavy into fly fishing for many years. And then there was one day that when I started writing, it actually wasn't bass fishing, it was trout fishing. I forgot my trout stuff when I went to fish tailwaters in Colorado. These are, the dream stream and stuff like that. What I did have was my bass box. So I started throwing really big jerk baits, like rogues and something you'd use for walleye or bass, and I started sticking big trout. And I started communicating with people like, "Hey, I know this tailwater. You think that these fish have PhDs, and you can only if you have an outfit like the dude from A River Runs Through It, you could catch fish. But if you're a normal blue collar guy that uses spinning rod, this is too technical for you." My goal was to change that, and I wanted people to know that these waters are public, and you can go catch fish. They aren't that much different than the fish that you're targeting now. Just upsize your baits. And when
Hey, let me
Yep.
give you a cool example here. I'm going to interrupt you because I just thought of this in a story I wrote last week. Um, Admittedly, I have probably seen A River Runs Through It 487 times at least. And I think what I loved now I also I was inspired to go to Colorado. I actually spent 2 summers in Colorado, Eric. I met my
Mhm.
wife in Colorado. Um, and I went to a guide school because I thought I wanted to be a big game guide. Well, it was easier to become certified as a fly fishing guide, and I was a River Runs Through It junkie,
Yeah.
right? So I ran into some people, and listen, be in your group, be you be you, boo, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just that old saying. But fly fishing is not for me anymore, but it was at the time, and what it taught me was discipline. Okay, it taught me something about adhering to the standards. That's fly fishing. Um, but it also told me something about live bait. And you'll remember a certain quote, right? Paul and Norman were talking about Norman's eventual brother-in-law, and he says he's going to show up with a coffee can full of worms, red can,
Yeah.
Hills Brothers. I'd lay a bet on it. And that to me pops in my mind all the time when I am working on writing a feature or sharing fishing experiences in Cullen, And Eric, you'll both agree there's nothing wrong with putting a hook or putting a worm on a hook, putting it below a bobber. If that gets you excited, if that gives you the memories, great. I'm not taking anything away from that, but it does illustrate a difference between you and that person. If you're dedicated to a cause, if you're building lures, if you're innovating and you're trying to find ways to make things better, you can accept staying the same, or you can push forward. And I think that taking a red can of Hillsborough coffee can full of worms to a trout river is going to tell the people around you a little bit about your care or desire to advance the sport. And again, I'm not judging. What I'm saying is if that's where you want to stay, you can expect results on that same level. But if you want to push forward and if you want to break barriers and you want to be yourself and establish a personality within every cast, I don't care if it's muskies, bluegills, bass, trout, whatever it is, you do you. And I think that's the beauty of fishing. And as a community, and we could talk about community judgment for hours. Like we could totally derail this whole podcast and go down the forward facing sonar discussion if we want. But you guys have both found ways to personalize your approach. And I interrupted you, Eric, but I wanted to like point out that there are certain elements of every genre I think that impact us as anglers. And I say take that, embrace it, and make it your own. Take your perspective and apply it. Don't let that hold you back. If you don't necessarily want to be a fly fisherman for trout, or you don't want to be a musky guy because we're crazy, but happy to be crazy with wrecked shoulders and sore hands. But at the very least, do you. And that's what you did in this business because you started communicating through the written word and photography, etc.
Yeah. Well, you said you're not going to judge everybody. I am going to judge everybody, and I'm just going to go ahead and say before that, and I love the movie, I love the writing, but before that movie came out, we had fly anglers out here. After that movie came out, we had there's no other way to say it. We had yuppies in outfits that didn't know the difference between a mayfly and a rooster, and they were in every single pull off. And it's actually one of the things that turned me off of fly fishing, which I'm glad. Yeah, right. Everything happens for a reason, but it was that movie, and I'm glad that it inspired people and say all the thing stuff. But I remember the way that I would get looked at walking down the river with basketball shorts on, because I don't care how I look, I care about the fish. It's always been the same way. I don't like if there's an outfit for fishing and it has to be specific and all the rest of the stuff, dude. I don't care. I'm here for one thing and one thing only. I'm about that business, boss, and that's it. Right? I'm here to catch fish, and it's living in Colorado. It's been interesting to say the least. But that thing has always grown with me, right? It's the tinkering, and hearing Cullen talking about making his baits and all the rest of the stuff. He stayed the course. I couldn't do it. I used to make my own jerk baits. I would get on tackleunderground.com. I would get inspired by other people. By the time I made a jerk bait, if I paid myself $3 an hour, it was like a $65 jerk bait. And when I would hang it up, I was not ready to keep fishing. I was just devastated. So it got to the point where I was like, look, this is for people that have more skills than I do. I'm just going to buy the stuff and I'm going to fish it. But that tinkering thing, and I did get away for years with communicating and stuff like that. So interesting thing about the Eagle Claw piece of this is I remember when I applied for pro staff for Eagle Claw. This is years and years ago, and I talked to Drew McGill, who's he's from the McGill family. He's owners of Eagle Claw right in McGill, and he said, Eric, we don't have any room on pro staff. This is years and years ago. I said, Mr. McGill, I'm not asking for anything other than for you to look at my stuff. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the free stuff. I love what I fish with Eagle Claw. My first rod and reel was Eagle Claw. My aunt worked at Eagle Claw. My dad gave me a Trail Master. I want to represent this company because this fishing thing has saved my life, and it means everything to me. And he very, very kind. He goes, okay, if you send me stuff every 3 months or whatever, let me know what you're doing. Long story short, they created my job for me. That's why officially it's content marketing coordinator, but it should just say content dude. You know what I mean? Because I write copy. I do a bunch. I do a bunch of other stuff. But my thing, again, going back to Cullen's thing, and I know we're going to talk about obsession and the things that we're very passionate about fishing, but fishing saved my life. Same thing with addiction. Fishing saved my life. I have anxiety and some other stuff too, which you probably can't tell when I'm talking. But the constant reminder for other people that the water is always there. And going to the nightcrawler thing that Thomas was talking about, it's like, look, dude, I if you get obsessed, as obsessed as we are, fantastic. Know that I will sink your kayak on tournament day, but other than that, we're good buddies, right? But the thing is like that in going back to In Fish, you know what I mean? I used to read In Fish, and I got away from the things that were binding me to struggle temporarily, because I could envision the places that they were writing about. I could see the photos. Like Cullen's giant musky. Like, dude, when I saw the pictures before the podcast of there's one where he's holding it, and the reference between his hand and the gill plate made me go, dude, dinosaurs exist, and I've never seen one. I have to. My life is not complete.
The look on his face, and then there's a shot that we'll have to pull up. I might have to send this to Marshall, but the releasing of the fish is the true tell of how enormous that thing was. And I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I promise you, Cullen, we're going to dive into that in a minute. But the ability to look at a fish and feel like you're there was captured in your photos. And those photos, listen, I'm a magazine guy, I'm a photographer. I have shot tens of thousands of photos, hundreds of thousands of photos. Well, if you count my trail camera pictures, which I didn't shoot, that's up to 1,000,000, but different story. The point is, your pictures were not necessarily super applicable to a magazine, but they provided more perspective, right, than any musky picture of a fish even remotely close to that caliber than anything I've seen. So I can't wait to talk about that. But Eric's on a diatribe here. I want him to finish that. But understand, when you share perspectives, when you relate to people, when you have a crappy boat, when you have night crawlers, that starts you, that gets you kind of pointed in that direction, and it gives you an appreciation for that. I'll never judge another man's boat ever, because I've been there. We've all been there. And I think that allows us to, if we want to better ourselves, if we want to build baits and make sure they run right, we got to have the right rig to get them there. You got to have the right components. But at the very least, it allows you the opportunity to teach somebody else. And if there's something that we can give back, I owe people, because of my obsession and my passion for fishing. And if I'm fishing with a dude that holds a spinning reel upside down, I'm probably going to make fun of him, but you know what? He's having the time of his life, and that I can't take away. you know, so Eric, I want you to continue. You're headed down this right road. So to take us to the point where all of your obsession, your love for fishing brought you to the opportunity that Eagle Claw created for you, which I think is a great part of your story. You were able to make your passion a career. Cullen the same. I have that same story, but talk a little bit about where that took you.
Started writing in like I want to say it's 2004, something like that. I was writing for a handful of publications out here, and then of course, when things changed, I started writing more digitally and stuff like that. But I was a diesel mechanic, right? I would blue collar guy. I would go to work. Well, actually, I would fish before work, go to work. I would fish after work, but constantly, we talked about it earlier, you can't turn it off. So I didn't go to bed till 2 o'clock at night, sometimes later than that. If I wasn't tinkering with tackle, I was writing. If I wasn't writing, I was on forums talking with people, and it kept growing and growing and growing. And then Chad Hamilton, who's my boss now at Eagle Claw, he sent me a message or an email, and he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing something. I need to know if you want to do it." And I was like, "Okay, well, dude, finish the email. What? You know what I mean? Like, tell me the thing." He goes, "If I can create." Yeah. Well, and the thing is the way that I was brought up through my old man is like, you give me a shot, that's all I need, right? You give me an opportunity. Like, I don't do this part time. I don't do this halfway. Like, all I need is a little glimmer of hope, and the fishing and the knowledge will take over from there. Um, so he kind of put feelers out, and I was like, dude, you do it, and I'll do it. I didn't ask about money. I didn't ask about any of that stuff. I said, if you do it, I'll do it. And then COVID hit, the whole world's going nuts and all the rest of the stuff. And he said, it's now, do you want to fill out an application? I was like, I will fill out the thing that's going to get me the job because there is nobody else. And if it comes down between me and another person, we're going to fish for it. And from that point on, I got my foot in the door, and um, every chance I get to talk fishing with people in this industry, I do. Thomas, Doug knows, Todd knows, when I send an email, it's not like, hey, we need this, or hey, can I send you this? It's, hey, dude, how's the fishing? This is how the fishing's been in my neck of the woods. And I'm constantly, dude, this is going to sound bad. I can't help it. I'm constantly leveraging being in this industry to be a better angler myself. I like, I, yeah. So it's one of those things where at times I should probably talk a little bit more in certain situations, but I'm going to do what I've always done to get me here, which is soak up as much as you can and surround yourself with sticks, and everything else will work out. You know what I mean? So,
You know, that's one of the best points I've heard in a long time, and I got jokingly accused of this a couple nights ago. I have some buddies here locally in Brainerd that Tommy and I fish together in 2, sometimes 3 different weeknight or local tournament trails, and we get spanked. It's been getting better as the years have gone on with our time in Brainerd. We've been here 4 years, so we're learning the fisheries, but I really get along well, and I kind of gravitate towards the dudes that beat me. And um, listen, if there is a tournament and Brandon or Evan show up, you're fishing for third pretty much. One of those guys are going to beat the other, but the rest of us are kind of um, working on getting to third place. But you have to embrace the suck. You have to be willing to get beat to learn, because the only way you get better is not to get pouty, take your ball and go home, put your boat on a trailer and cuss the dudes that beat you. Like that's the worst part of tournament fishing is not accepting your loss. And I think that no matter where you're at in life, there's a point where you realize I have really sucked at a lot of things. I have really sucked at catching muskies. I've really sucked at catching bass. I've really sucked at a lot of things. Maybe personally there are things that are affecting your ability to fish. Your internal reason comes to a point where you redirect yourself. And I think that you gravitate towards people that are better than you in certain elements. And this is a true story. Those people in turn kind of find a way that they're not good at things that you may be, and you build an amicable friendship, a relationship, a family relationship that you otherwise wouldn't have had. And the core to that is fishing.
mhm.
I know it sounds silly and I'm going off on a philosophical rant, but the reality is we're all tied together because we give a crap about a fish, because we care about the details in a lure. We care about how people perceive a hook and the science that went behind that. And I'm not fluffing your pillows. I really care that you guys are passionate about what you do. And I think that there's a whole lot of us out there. We're a big family, right? That are the same way, that change tires for a living,
Mhm.
that put sheetrock up for a living, that do stuff that we don't want to have to do. But it's because of those people that we're able to live our day to day. And we're all one big giant family because we care about what bites on the end of the line, right? That's really at the core of why we have our positions, the three of us, or our
Mhm.
jobs or our careers in this industry, because we care about the experience other people have. And I'm going to rant and rave if I keep going down this trail, but we got to talk about really big fish. And Cullen, I got to say, one of my favorite stories is this giant muskie that you caught. And I'm trying to remember the days that we connected, because I wrote 2 muskie pieces over the last 3 years on a holiday. like Thanksgiving Day, I wrote the story about the Minnesota state record muskie, and
Okay.
then your story was around that time frame. But I'm going to turn the floor back over to you. I want you to talk about your hunt. So you were catching muskies, you're building baits, and then all of a sudden those baits became an industry standard setter, if you will, in trolling application hard baits. But you decided that wasn't enough. You needed to go find a fish to validate for yourself and the quality of these lures what they were capable of. So talk me through, I guess, your mindset knowing you were on a world-class fishery.
Um,
How did you find these fish and then get your lure stuck in one of their mouths?
so it's funny. There is so many gigantic fish that have been caught on this bait. Guys wouldn't let me use the pictures. I'm like, I understand it, but at the same time, you're like, man, like I'm talking 50 pounder after 50 pounder. And, like where I was fishing, I know like the caliber of those fish that have come out of there in the past. And that's basically what it was. Like, in a way, obviously I just wanted to catch one of those, but like, okay, like nobody's gonna help me out here. I'll go do it myself. And,
Mm.
there's certain places I fish and you'll catch big fish. But I feel like there's other places where like I always referred to it like there's spots I know where I could catch even 55 inchers and like, giant fish and probably catch them like at a better rate. Um, but where I was fishing, I always look at it like as like playing Mega Millions versus scratch offs. Like, and people used to tell me I was crazy for going there, and you should just fish this, dude. You could get a 45 pounders all the time, and this and that. And I remember years ago, like I would always say no because you know what? One of those times that rod's going to go off and it's going to be one of those crazy fish. Like, we've all seen like the Dale McNair fish and, other, water wolf fish like that. Um, and I just thought that, you know, if I, dialed in enough and did it for long enough, like that's going to happen to me. And that's the thing with fishing there. Like you catch a good amount of like 48-pound or 48-inch fish too. And that's the thing, you never know. Like that's what
Mm.
makes it so like um intense. Like that rod could go off and it's gonna be a world record. And like that's what you're trying to do. So basically for the last I started fishing that area on my own, alone in my 92 tracker at night. I knew some basic things that I had read on the internet, but I basically went out there and just started, trolling the way I would think you would do it. And the second time there, I actually was like one of the, bigger fish I had ever caught there. It was a 53, and it was like super giant fat fish at the end of October. And, it basically, there's a lot of stuff I've done at that place that like people like acted like I was stupid because I wanted to, try this or do that, or like told me you got to do this and you got to do that. And, I've heard people tell me you can't catch a fish within 70 feet of the boat and acted like I was an idiot because I was doing that. And I sure as hell caught that big fish within 75 feet of the boat.
I love that.
Um, and it was like, yeah. And I mean, like 2 weeks before I was, talking about it, like, sometimes I think you just gotta like not take everything you hear. Like obviously, somebody's good at a spot or they've been doing it for a long time. Like you want to take their advice, but you can't take everything everybody says because I've seen it a million times in just stuff like regular bass fishing, steelhead fishing, where somebody, oh, it sucked. Well, maybe you didn't just like drag your jig at the perfect little thing and somebody else caught 20 fish. Like I've seen it a million times, where I showed up and they're like, it's done. And then you hammered them. And I've had it this other way around before where
Mhm,
everybody's
mhm.
catching fish. And I'm like, why can't I catch a fish right now?
Well, walk us through that day. So you had a premonition. You knew conditions were right before you hit the water. Boat's launched. You're there. You're thinking about this. You've got a bait in hand that you know has all the right components to catch a big fish. And the funny thing is, musky fishing has evolved into this. It's done a funny ebb and flow. You I mean, there are 2 pounders out there. There are plastic baits that are
Yeah.
just unreasonable sizes and weights, and they're hard on your body. But the bait that you caught this fish on really wasn't astonishingly large. I mean, a 40 incher could have ate that thing, but
Yeah.
uh, that doesn't take away from its effectiveness. But you knew that conditions were going to be right, and you fished through the night. Which, listen, we're I think we're probably all close to the same age. I don't know how you do it. Like I get past
Yeah.
8 o'clock at night, and I'm ready to be done. I'm cashing in. So launch the boat. You're headed out there. What's on your mind? Talk me through how that fish came to be.
Um, so basically, I just know that that bait's like been a consistent bait that fires. We had marked some fish, and we were working them over, and we had not done anything. And then finally, when that fish ate, we get it in the bag, and you're just like looking at it like that's basically what I would do is go there and I'd mark fish and then just keep working them over and hope that they eat at some point.
One of the things that Eric has become very proficient at, he's a kayak angler. He has a boat. He's like me. We
Mhm.
got both. But you found a way to identify overlooked structure. And is this the kind of thing where you're tooling along, you notice something, you mark it, and you come back? But what he just said, he's like, I found a fish on a piece of structure, and I went back and forth in a trolling pattern until that fish finally decided he was going to eat. Do you approach a piece of structure the same way?
So the brush pile that I caught the state record crappie and I probably fished 500 times, maybe more. Um, yeah, I'll side scan and what I'll do is I'll mark waypoints. I'll do my homework just like we all do, right? Um, and then what I'll do at that point, this is where the internet's going to light on fire. Then I'll go with forward facing sonar, right? Use all the tools at my disposal. And what I'll do first, and I don't know how lost in the weeds you want me to get on this, but initially I don't care about looking at fish. Initially, what I want to see is I'll turn the gain down. I want to get a really good idea of the piece of structure. Like it's if it's a brush pile or whatever that's somebody sunk or something like that. I really really want to understand how it sets up because then I can better understand how to position my bait with how I feel like the fish are set up. So I'll basically 360 it with I use active target, but forward facing sonar. And then when I start presenting baits, I'll turn up the gain and then I'll start fishing. But the homework that I put in, I talking about tournament fishing earlier, uh the amount of legwork that I do for the bodies of water that I fish often or the bodies of water that I am going to fish, uh borderline exhausting it. You know what I mean? It's Google Earth. The bodies of water that I fish out here, they fluctuate by hundreds of feet. So I can use the history function on Google Earth, and I'll set waypoints on Google Earth to the tune of depending on how big the water is. Sometimes it's 50, sometimes it's 1,500, and then I'll take the time in a kayak a lot of the times, and I'll go through and I'll see where the juice is, right? And then I eliminate a lot of it and I go back to it. So super, super long way to say, yeah, dude, I do the same thing. Like the and it's some of the funnest stuff to me is doing the work that nobody else is doing and going back to the thing that Cullen talked about earlier, where it's like everybody wants to fish somebody else's history and all the rest of the stuff. It's like I thrive in doing what I don't think other people will do because I don't want the same results.
Well, I think that's exactly Cullen's take too, right? I just complained about being out after dark. I've got a bedtime. I wake up no matter what at 5 a.m. So I do want this story, Culvin. This is very important to me.
Um,
Okay.
so basically, it was 2022. That year was just like not a great year for me, like compared to almost every previous year. Like, just like I said, typically, like stuff that usually was like it was just not lining up. And there was a lot of people that said about the certain fishery, like a lot of people did struggle. And then there was a few guys that did some different stuff and did really good. So, but anyways, like it was a struggle for sure. And typically like every year I would have like a 55-inch fish was my goal every year, and typically I would get it before August. And in 2022, I struggled for sure. And I fished probably harder than I ever have because, like, I don't know if you can relate to this. Sometimes if you go out, I've had nights where I hammered, five muskies and, you know, 12 hours. And then you're like, oh, like, they're still biting. Like, maybe not still biting, but you're happy. Or you go out and you get three within five hours. Well, like the more like I'm like, why can't I get these things to eat? The crazier I get. Like now I'm literally staying out there for 18 hours. I remember at one point 18 hours casting straight, zero break. Day into the night, back into the day. And same thing with like trolling, and maybe it helped me because it like gave me more determination again, like as to, just keep pushing and grind through it. And um it's gonna happen for you, because I was getting crazy because it was such a tough year. And we get out there, we had fished a different section of the river for a few days, and I really wanted to fish this spot. And finally on like the last day, and our buddies had been up there and they were hammering fish in the one spot, and you could tell like it was moon and storms were coming in. And then all of a sudden, like when we launched the boat, I remember the two guys we knew caught their last fish, and they still didn't catch a fish, I think, for like a day or two after. Like days and days later, I caught that fish. So I set it on the way up. I turned to this guy, John Miller, the guy I was fishing with. He's also from Buffalo, caught a ton of huge fish too. And we're like, he's like, I kind of feel like we're just showing up at like the absolute worst time. And I felt like that happened to me and him a few times going there. And I'm like, I know, I totally agree. So finally on the last day, where I'm like, dude, I want like this. That's where that's where you're gonna get that like out of control fish. Like I want big. I want like the biggest fish that exists, basically. And we get out there, we start fishing at probably like 3. I work the stuff where typically I'd see fish, your classic spots. I marked this one mark on the sonar, and he had you know, a substantial sonar, but it wasn't anything crazy, no live scope, like nothing like that. And the arc I see on this fish finder, I'm like confused. And I said to him, I'm like, dude, I think that might be a sturgeon. I'm like, that thing is just ridiculous. But I waypoint it anyways, and that's what I would do when fishing this area. I'll waypoint where I'm marking the marks, because how I'm fishing them, they show up very well. And typically you'll create a pattern of where they're sitting and the area to work. We knew two other I knew two other guys that were out there with somebody else in their boat as well, some pretty well-known guys. And I basically, every time mark a fish, drop a waypoint, I keep narrowing it down. If I'm not seeing fish, repeatedly, I don't want to keep driving over blank water, so I just keep cutting this little like area I'm working short. So we like come back up and see this other huge mark, and I'm like, dude, there's another one that's just like massive. And I look on the fish finder, and it's the same fish. I'm like, it's got to be the same fish. We're just like at a little bit of a different angle or closer to shore or whatever. And so like we fish sunset, which obviously a lot of people know is typically like a time that a rod might go. Nothing. There's like another moon phase at like 8:30 or 9 or something like that. Nothing. And we know like multiple other guys out on the water, and nobody's doing it. I'm like, really? Like nobody's like, because the conditions weren't that bad. It was starting to rebound, after the front and whatever. And I'm like, damn. So me and John had been fishing for 3 days now. We haven't seen a muskie. We're like, and we've had some rough trips already this year, and like we're like, dude, like all the money and time, and like obviously it's part of it, but like it's like, man, like that is sometimes like a huge defeat. And how far we're driving to do this, and we're
Everybody's got a limit.
yeah. And I mean, like when we go out and fish this area that where I caught that fish, we're basically never fishing less than 14 hours. We're not. Like, you're not just gonna go out there and just, like, we are absolutely crazy about it. Like my partner John Pencil, we'll be switching on and off driving because we're falling asleep at the wheel, like pretty much every single time we go out. It's never go out for 8 hours. Like I feel like we're cutting it short. Like if we're fishing even like at that spot, like it's just nothing. If you're going out there for 8 hours, that's not hardcore at all. Um, at least when we're doing that, trying to do what you're doing. But yeah, we'll fish into the night a lot. I've had seen some weird bites over the years where consistently, even not like revolved around moon, but it could possibly be water fluctuation or whatever, where like 2:30 in the morning was good for some reason. Um, but I'm a big fan of fishing at night. A lot of it is there's an eerie essence to it, like that just quiet and it's dark out, and all of a sudden when that rod goes, it's like heart attack time. And
Well, like you said, it could be a world record. I mean,
oh yeah,
it
for
there
sure. So
one of
that's
the
I will say
totally gets you.
in this spot, that's a lot of what will keep you going for those long hours because it's like, well, I mean, this is gonna sound horrible, but like at that level of the game, it's not like, oh well, like the biggest I'm gonna catch is like a 50 incher anyways. Let's just pack it up. It's like no, like it could be the next world record. Like that's like how
Yeah.
you gotta look at it to keep yourself sane and to keep doing it. And anyways, there was like one last moon phase from like 12:30 to 12 to 2:30, something like that. It was in that range. I had this out on wireline, which I like to do, pretty tight to the boat to where most people wouldn't even run it that tight. That's a pretty small bait for that area. People told me it was too small of a bait, that they like big stuff there and it's got to be jointed because they like knockers and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't know, I've caught a lot of fish in that area, like on that, like I did, and I caught some pretty good ones. And I just want to do my thing. Like, if anybody that really knows me, and this is not a lie, if I'm trolling crankbaits, I only troll my stuff, and I've never had it put me at a disadvantage. I've never been in the boat and said, "Oh, he just caught this many fish on that. I wish I can find. I will find out of all the models I make,
Oh,
they will destroy one if
there you
those
go.
fish are eating consistently." I've just
Mhm.
always found it. So until I really see a huge reason, like because I take pride on just catching fish on my baits. Like, still after this long, like I just like doing it. But we were coming back through this area where we had marked the huge fish that we thought was could be a sturgeon. All of a sudden, the wire rod goes, and we just look at each other like, "Oh my god!" It's like The Office when they're like, "Oh my god, it's happening! What do we do?"
Mhm.
So I get back there, and I always had this like idea in my head that it was gonna be like sound like a salmon rod dipsy going off, like unbelievable pull. It was not a bad pull, that's for sure. And you could hear the space in between the head shakes as it I grab it, and I will say, especially on wire, because wire can make the things feel a little different. I know it's not like a small muskie. I know it's not a 36 incher, but I don't know what I'm really playing with. So I'm like, whatever, we caught a fish. At least we're not getting skunked. Like it could have been a 48 incher, and I would have been the happiest guy in the world at the time. And I'm fighting the thing, fighting just like a pretty good sized muskie or whatever. All of a sudden, and this is the only time I've had it happen with casting fish where I hooked them and I was like, am I snagged? And then realized I'm not snagged. Like it was just such a stop and like zero budge. Well, I'm fighting this fish, and all of a sudden it just stops. And if you looked from like another boat from like 50 feet away, it would look like I'm snagged. Like it's not head shaking. This is going to sound absolutely crazy because like I fish long enough to know the difference and stuff, but like with what this fish was doing, I was like almost like, did it wrap me under a log or something? Like, or get me stuck on something down there? Like it was the weirdest thing ever. Like the thing was just sitting there, like it was sitting with its mouth closed with the bait in the mouth. Like I am not moving, I'm not swimming, I'm not head shaking. Like I'm just gonna sit here. And I turned to John and I'm like, "You're gonna have to slow the boat down, man. Like I can't even move this thing. I'm like, I think this might be a pretty good fish." He's like, "It's already as slow as it can go." I was like, "Then you gotta shut off the motor, man, because I can't move this thing." Soon as he shut off the motor, it starts stripping wire like pretty good. Like, and when your drag's locked down far enough and it's stripping, like you're like, I'm like, dude, this thing might be big, man. So, anyways, fight it in. we see it in the headlamps from about 15 feet away, and it was like he knew before me. He was like, "That's her." That's what he said. "That's her, dude." In this thing, I see it, and like I'm confused. I start shaking, my knees are buckling. I'm like, I'm gonna lose this fish because my adrenaline's pumping so hard that I can't control myself. And like, I'm not gonna lie, like, if I got a 55-inch fish on typically casting, I'm able to remain real calm, turn the head, put it in the bag. Like, me and my partner got it down pretty good, and do everything the right way to help the person. I'm not gonna lie. I turned into like the guy that's never been fishing for king salmon, just like trying to reel while the fish is like running and doing like I'm just turned into a robot. And we finally I was getting it real close. Starts splashing and going back towards the kicker, and I'm not doing much to help John. Like, I'm not backing up, I'm not turning it. I'm just kind of like robot. And he reaches in front of me, and I remember thinking like, no, this is not good. But John is like one of those dudes that is built like an absolute tank. Like, he's just a giant guy. Like, the forearms on him, he's just built like a tank. He reaches in front of me with like the fish way past me towards the kicker motor, and somehow he's like so strong and just huge. He's got the leverage and gets the thing. I'm like, are you serious right now? Like, how did you even do that? Get it in the bag, and then I really looked at it, and I'm looking at the fish, and I'm like, how is it so much bigger than a 57 and a half incher? How is it bigger, so much bigger than a 45 pounder? Like, this isn't even in the same realm of like these other big fish I've seen. Like, everything on it was giant. Like you said, the hand and the where the tail is, I mean, it's like absolutely ridiculous. So like I'm like, what do I have here? So we take it out of the bag. First thing I gotta do is measure. I want to know how long this thing is. We put it on the board. He starts yelling, "Colin, are you seeing this? Are you seeing this?" And I look, and as soon as I see it's a 59 and a half inch, I just like lose my mind.
Oh my
And
gosh.
like I'm like screaming, shaking, like I don't even know how to act. We're trying to get pictures. It's a mess. He's in shock too. And he had a 57 and a half or 57 and three quarters at that time, and he's losing his mind too. And we were trying to take pictures. My phone's being weird, or I like don't even know how to function as a human being. His is all slimy and from helping me. So we get some like pretty horrible pics, and I'm like in my mind, I'm like, dude, I cannot have like it all low quality pictures of this fish. And it's gotta be weighed. And I did have a scale with me. It wasn't a Chatillion, but I knew the other guys did. And so I call them, they don't answer. I'm like, damn it. Call them again, and I'm like, dude, I got a 59 and a half incher. You got to get over here. And I immediately heard John Pencil tell the guy in his boat, bring those in. Cullen's got a 59 and a half incher. And they come over, and then our other two buddies come over too. And by this time, obviously, I put it back in the bag, so it's sitting in the water. And their boats are on like the far side. I have the net on this over this side, and they're over here. And I'm just screaming at them, and it was definitely a lot of profanity. But basically, wait till you see this thing. It's got to be 55 pounds, is what I said. I pull the thing out, and everybody's just like losing it. Like, what is that thing? There's a video of me pulling it out, and they're just all freaking out. So we get all the pictures, everybody's losing it, and I'm like, we gotta weigh it. And we did the weigh it in the net, so you're not hanging the fish, obviously, and then subtract the net. There was 5 people there when we weighed it, and I asked John, I'm like, what's it say? What's it say? And it was taking like me or one buddy and John Miller too to hold the thing up over the, gunnel or the back deck. And Pencil almost sounded like he was gonna cry. His voice started cracking, and he goes, "It's reading 62 pounds. It's a 58-pound fish. And I just like lost my mind. Like my head was gonna blow off from happiness. And we we weighed the bag because you take the um whatever, the handle out, and it was three and
Mhm.
change. So it was actually a little over 58 pounds. And we got a bunch of good video, a bunch of good pictures, videoed and took screenshots of the video to get different shots. And like it was just the most ideal situation for me, at least, because like, yeah, say it was even like 70 pounder and I killed it, even though and I totally understand, but legally you have the right to do that, but you're going to get so much whatever about it. And I understand it because I'm,
Oh yeah.
part of the Niagara Muskie Association. We're probably one of the craziest about fish handling and all that. But so I'm like, well, I'm not killing it. And it just worked out because like nobody could say like I never wanted that. Like, even though it really doesn't matter, because typically the guy on one of those pages that's talking crap, like, is, you know, he's got no room to even say anything. There's just a lot of people that like to be haters on the internet and tear other people down. Like was what was mentioned earlier about like the gear, like somebody making fun of somebody's boat, or, somebody's overly being cynical about how a new person handled a fish. Well, like, I gotta take myself back to like when I started to remember it like that, because I did a lot of stuff wrong and I had a lot of crappy gear, and everybody starts somewhere. And I had it with the gym. I remember I used to have these buddies that used to rib on me because I was small and I was skinny, and they'd post little funny memes and Facebook videos, and now I would eat all of them for breakfast. So it's just like, watch what you say. And for me it was the best because like I got to share it with like a bunch of my closest fishing friends. Everything's on video, everything's legitimate as you could possibly be without killing the fish. And obviously catching it on one of my baits, that's like my favorite bait. Like, that thing is always down. I designed this for fishing rivers at night. And like, I just knew that one of these times it would eventually do it, and finally did. And there's been some absolute other crazy fish that have been caught on this thing that have never seen the light of day. Um, so that's
Cullen,
my.
I gotta say, like, I could stop the show right now and be satisfied with that story, the passion that you told it. And you're right. I think that, we've talked about what keeps us going, what motivates us to improve. There's a whole other component to this, and that's sharing that experience with people. I
Yeah.
mean, having my son on the boat at Lake of the Woods, super important. There's Eric and I fished together this summer. That was a great time. I taught him a thing or two. He may not, he might see it that way or not. But the bottom line is if you have someone in the boat or somebody with you that kind of shares your obsession, it drives you to continue. And
Oh, definitely.
dude, that story is one of my favorite muskie stories. I don't know how I'm going to get it down here. I'm going to lift the camera up. So behind me over my shoulder, I'm privy to have in this room I've created world record replicas. Okay. So I'm gonna step away from the mic for just a second. I'm gonna hold this thing up. This is a replica of a 60-pound plus muskie that like it's on the wall. It's enormous. I'm not gonna be able to put it back there without breaking it, but I'm gonna hold it and I want you to see these hands. All right. So hang on. Watch this. It's gonna be crazy. Oh my gosh. So this is the kind of fish Cullen caught. See my hands? It's unbelievable. I'll hang this up later. I'm gonna put it on a couch. It didn't break, I promise. Sorry for the off camera thing. Isn't that crazy? That's unbelievable. What's it say here? Oh. Anyway, so listen, that story is one of my favorites. I had the opportunity to interview you. That's how we met. I wrote the story. It's a very popular, searched out story on both In-Fisherman and Game and Fish. But I know that Cullen would agree with this, Eric, and I'm going to pass it to you. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, how do you follow that? How do you talk about a state record crappie when we're talking about a potential world record muskie caught by a dude that makes his own baits and is obsessed as anybody? But here's the thing, like, it's all relative. You live in an area in Colorado that's not renowned for anything other than trout fishing. I mean, everybody thinks, elk and trout when they go to Colorado, but really, you accomplish something in your life that's very important to you,
Mhm.
and it's something that you worked for. And I think you'll tell me, like, you did not leave the house that day to go crappie fishing, but you
No,
bumped
no.
into a fish
Mhm.
that really was very important to where you're at, what you do, and frankly, the story that I got to
Mhm.
partake in and share with people is your obsession and drive for perfection, and that crappie is an indication of that. So I'm going to hand it to you now. Let's hear about your Colorado state record catch and release crappie.
Now, I'm I'm glad you prefaced it the way that you did, because I'm a huge fan of stand-up comedy, and they always talk about following a monster and how hard it is. Um, so I going back to the tinkering stuff and being obsessive, I've been playing with the hover rig for a couple years. I'm gonna try not to get lost in the weeds on the how I got into it, but if you guys remember the COVID iCast, Tackle Warehouse did a video with one of the guys from Decoy, and they talked about the hover rig, and immediately I was kind of drawn to it because it's one of those things I like doing what other people won't do. There's something about it I like. But as soon as the guy started talking about 3 and 4 pound test, I was like, dude, I'm good on that. That's too light. I mean, I'm not going to do it. And then little by little, I started getting more and more intrigued. So over the course of it, it's I think it was about a year and a half at that point or something like that. I had a system that was down pat. I was tying the keepers on the jig hooks at a Trocar TK 570 VP. It's got a V bend. Thomas, and we went fishing this summer, that the V bend just locks them in. It's you don't have to worry as much when you hook onto something good. So that morning I went out, and the idea is just to continue to prove the theories that I'm working on, and then further kind of enhance and just because the thing is I'm a tournament angler too, and I want to be as efficient as possible with different things. I knew the hover rig was cooking with peanut oil, but it's one of those things. Is it the most efficient presentation for these circumstances? So that's actually what I was working on. Is I wanted to further fine tune. Okay, I know I could catch fish on the hover rig, but it fishes slow. So if I can catch fish on a little finesse swim bait or a jerk bait, it's faster, it's more efficient, it makes me better. So I'm going through, and I had a little milk run. I've got the spot where I caught the fish. I've got it all mapped out. I know exactly how many brush piles are in there. I know exactly where the concrete tubes are. I know where everything is. So I figure I'm going to fish for an hour. I have a couple things that I want to figure out. I'm talking a lot with my hands here. So it actually started weird. The lake is typically super super clear, and I go to launch my kayak, and it's got a weird stain to it, and the clarity's not very good. So I take the colors that I already had rigged, and I completely I just start over, and I re-rig black flatworms. It's that jig hook I was talking about with the tungsten weight. And anytime the water is murky, I'm comfortable with black. I know it stands out. And so I go to the first brush pile. It's not happening like it should, and I'm getting a little worried that my not that I'm not going to catch fish, it's that my I'm going to lose a day in my process of getting this where I want it to be. So second brush pile, I stick a nice bass, fought pretty good, and I'm going, okay, well at least I got that. I move up to the third brush pile, and it's a really neat spot. It's got a concrete tube. It's got a pipe that comes out of it, so not really a brush pile, but just that's what I call them, as brush piles. And I on active target, there's 3 fish, and they're acting different than the bass do. And it's they look like going. I can't believe I'm going to compare this crappie to what Cullen was saying about the mark on his sonar. Uh, but but they look, dude, it looked like 3 blimps, like on active target, like in just the when you do something long enough, whether it's 2D or forward facing sonar or whatever, you you can interpret the information in a way that helps you. And I was watching their body language, and I knew they weren't bass. I was hoping and praying that they were crappie, and I dropped down almost vertical, and I'm everything is playing off their body language, right? This is I could feel Randy Blanket getting mad at me right now, but it's okay. So I could yeah, I could it's that thing. It's the instinctual thing that you've been working on your whole life. It's the same thing as Cullen's talking about, where you got a feeling and all the rest of stuff. It's just a different tool to get there. So I at one point I feel like the best thing that I could do is basically dead stick it. And I'm dead sticking it for I as the clock is turning, I couldn't tell you how long it was. It felt like about 2 hours. It was painful, but I felt like when I had that fish locked in, the only thing that I could do is screw it up. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, going back to knowledge and time on the water, it's like you get a smallie chasing a bait. What do? You try to make that fish understand it's going to get away if it doesn't attack. You go faster. You know what I mean? It's a lifetime of stuff in your dome piece that doesn't help you with most things in life, but it helps you in this situation. And she finally hits, and mind you, I'm hoping it's crappie. I don't know, and it's the most anticlimactic thing in the world. Like I and I keep playing it back in my head to where when I set the hook, there was weight and I knew it was solid, but it wasn't like this, you know, monumental fight. It was just it came to the surface, and when I saw it was a crappie, I lost it. I lost it. I start freaking out. And Thomas, like you posted the video, but you couldn't post the 3 minutes after that. It was very it was very tight what we could post and couldn't post, because once I netted her, the reality of what just happened set in, and I say some choice words over and over again, and then I'm second guessing with my brain what my eyeballs are looking at. Because for one, going back to the thing, I'm not Mississippi, I'm not Alabama, I'm not Minnesota, I'm in Colorado, not known as a crappie stronghold, and definitely not known for big crappie. So I'm going, okay, and I've caught, I'm lucky to have caught a bunch of big crappie in my life, nothing this big. So I go, okay, first thing I'm gonna do is weigh it. And I'm already thinking about calling my wife at this point, because I don't have a buddy with me, and it's one of those things where it's like most of the time I do enjoy fishing alone because I don't have a lot of people that are as crazy as I am out here. But this time I'm already thinking about calling my wife. So anyway, I I put it on the scale. It's 3 pounds 15 ounces, and I'm going, wait a minute, like this is bigger than I thought. So I weigh her 3 times, put her in the net. Is it? I know I'm not going to keep the fish. Uh, And then as I put her in the net, I go, okay, Colorado just revamped their catch and release state records. How long is she? So then I have a hog trough because I fish kayak tournaments, not a hog trough, excuse me, a catch board. And she's 18 and a quarter. So I take a couple pictures of her. I put her back in the net. And the way I have the net, it's basically like a little live well, and I process everything. I'm just like, so then I get on CPW's website. I see that I shatter the weight record if I keep her. I shatter the length record if I don't. And then I call my wife while the fish is still in the thing, and I said, "Dear, I just caught a state record, and I wanted you to know first." Which is like, who else am I going to tell, right? So anyway, I I make sure I document it, and I got the GoPro going and all the rest of the stuff, and then I watch her go down as I release her, and I don't know how to word it, and Cullen, Thomas, it completes the process. It's not the same, and I don't judge other people like Thomas, you're saying, I might have kept her. Like I don't judge other people for it. And it's not the thing, but with what I have in my brain, with what I have in my heart, I would judge myself if I kept her. Now, just to show you that I'm a giant hypocrite, if I catch the Colorado state record bass, that might be a different story. so, so just total honesty here. but yeah, it was just, and then I called my wife and I told her all about it. Thomas, I texted you when I was on the water. Um, it's one of those things that it's so much work led up to that with tinkering, putting it, but like I've got a fish tank at my house and I got all these little baits dangling from it, and I make sure that I have the weight perfect. All these little things that are obsessive and might not make sense to a lot of people. Same thing with hook selection. I got to talk hook selection at least briefly. Um, that TK 570. So that V bend, what it does is, so you put the wood to anything. You put the wood bass, crappie, anything. You put the wood to them. What happens is it immediately funnels it to the lowest point of the V and it locks them in. A lot of us know O'Shaughnessy style, the O'Shaughnessy style hooks, with the O'Shaughnessy bend. It's that, but more. So when she was flopping on the surface, which is like my like the difference between a fish story and a picture dangling in front of me as I'm trying to not be my own worst enemy with a net and like stab the crappie or something like that. After I had her in the net and I removed the hook, dude, I could have boat flipped her. Legit, I could have boat flipped her. Like the way that she was pinned, and I don't want to make this about stuff, but the way that she was pinned, dude, like it wasn't going anywhere. Um, and then being able to communicate with Thomas and talk about the fish was super cool, and then obviously getting the TK 570 VP
But but
in
but
the
he,
fish was also cool. So it was just
well,
cool.
here's the thing that I
I
love.
wish I
Like
had something.
I want to illustrate the difference in fish species, but the same value in the experience. And Eric, I know you've worked a long time for that. Cullen, I know you've worked a long time for your accomplishment. And I think what really intrigues me is the inspiration by determination. You want to perfect your presentation. You want to test. You want to prove to yourself, Cullen, you should never apologize for fishing with the baits you develop, because that means that when somebody buys your bait, you believe in them, that you're confident that somebody that spends $100+ on a lure, which sounds silly, but they are getting that kind of quality and experience in that bait. And Eric, the same thing. When someone buys an Eagle Claw hook, they know that there's a guy like you that works at that facility that not only stands behind the product, believes in the product, but when you're done with work in the afternoon, you're out on the lake, you're in your kayak, you're making sure that it works. And I can't tell you the level of inspiration I've got
Yeah.
from that type of approach to fishing. I knew when I was in fourth and fifth grade, when my dad bought me that first In-Fisherman video that literally turned my life in this direction, that those guys left their home, wherever it was here in Brainerd. They drove to work with the boat hooked up to the back of their station wagons. And the minute that they were done in the office, they were headed to North Long Lake, or they were headed to Perch Lake, or they were headed to a lake here locally that got them on the water. Because ultimately, what makes us, the three of us, and anybody that thinks like us, what makes us successful at fishing is our desire to be on the water with those we care about, and our ability to innovate and improve the current presentation so that we catch fish. You got to stay adaptable. You have to be inspired by change. You have to love the science.
Yeah.
Listen, I don't want to I don't want to preach here, but it really comes down to the value of seeing that fish swim away, because we care about the resource. I'm going to ask you guys each one more question, and we're actually at an hour and 58 minutes. We're doing great, by the way. I am going to listen to every second of this podcast at least one more time or twice more, because we've got some great stuff flowing here. But Cullen, talk to me about that moment when you saw that fish swim away. I want to hear the emotional feeling you had when you saw her healthy.
It's like bittersweet. Because obviously you just want to keep holding the fish like that and keep it around for forever. Um, but like I said, when I was swimming away, it's just like this sounds probably crazy in a way, but it's like you did it. Like it's like you beat level 160 on the Sega game when you were a kid. Like that's just what it felt like. Like now I'm just playing the bonus unlocked levels, and just seeing it swim away was great to know, because it you catch a fish deep enough, especially a muskie, it does take a while to get the air out of it, and it did, and we stayed with it for a while till it finally swam away on its own.
Well, it comes back to the inspiration by determination. You want that fish to survive. You want the fishery to survive. You want to give people the opportunity to catch the fish of a lifetime on your bait. And now, to be honest, they can catch that fish again. And Eric, the same question to you. You said you saw her go. I saw the video. Well,
Yeah,
I know
I'm gonna
you'd like
catch her
to as
again.
well. You might have to take me out there. But really, the value of catch and release. You said that you caught a fish that would break the catch and keep state record. You caught a fish that would break
Mhm.
the catch and release state record. I joke, and trust me, I cannot fillet a fish. I have taught my son. Let me rephrase that. My son has learned how to fillet fish from other people better than me. I'm no good at it. There's a joke that exists out there. If you're going to catch a big crappie or a big walleye, I want the cheek meat, I want the fillet, release into the grease. I get all that. Musky steaks, beer
Yeah.
battered. They're not bad. I mean, you can pickle a pike. I'm sure pickled muskie's okay, but I'm kidding, folks. Settle down. I'm just kidding. But the reality is, you have completed the cycle when you
Yeah.
release that trophy fish. So, Eric, your final thoughts on turning back a state record?
Dude, Cullen said it perfectly. Bittersweet. You know what I mean? It feels really good, but at the same time, I wanted people to actually like the proportions of the fish were just ridiculous. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no there's yeah. So that was the part where I was like, that's difficult, but the benefit of that is I get to second guess myself a little bit, and she lives in my brain forever in a way that's different than I would have kept her. Because
Yes.
if you keep her, you could see her and all the rest of the stuff, and at some point she fades in some way, shape, or
Yep.
form. Even if you immortalize her and you put her on the wall, it's different. But when you let her go, it's like, were her shoulders really that big? Was it really like that? So it's like it's this thing that lives forever, and then there's the other piece, the other component to I'm gonna see her again. The thing, you know what I mean? It's like I know where she's at. She's just gonna get bigger. So a lot of different things at play, but yeah, it was completing the process in a way that builds mystique. Also, why contradicting it a little bit because I love forward-facing sonar and it removes mystique. So, Thomas, I responded, I responded very, I responded very
Yeah.
heartfelt, and then I went straight to the drama of forward-facing sonar. So I apologize for that.
Well, we can have that conversation another day, but what you guys just said, that's what I wanted. We're 2 hours into a podcast, and I wanted to hear the feeling that you had when you let her go, deep in your heart. Why did you do it? And Eric, I think that is probably in hearing Cullen like echo your thoughts on that is one of the purest examples of why, so that it can live in your brain rent free, right? Knowing that that fish was released, you did right by the quality of the genetics, you did right by the fishery, you did right by the community, but you did right by yourself. You give a
Mhm.
crap about a fish so much that you have a limited opportunity to experience that fish like Cullen did, exactly like your fish. It's so limited. You fish for 14 hours straight, 3 days in a row, only to spend 60 seconds with that thing or less. And I think that that is some of the most honorable level of catch and release and fishing fanaticism that we can possibly define. So what I want people to take from this experience, from this conversation we've had with three guys that care a lot about fishing, is that it doesn't matter what place you're in, wherever you're at in your life, fishing offers a release, it offers a relationship, it offers people, it offers experiences, it offers nature. And I don't know of a better way to heal a broken person or to take somebody to a level that just can't get there anywhere else than breathing fresh air, baiting a hook, making a bait, tying a jig, setting a hook, whatever it is, it's primal. And I think that's built into every one of us in a way that it's hard to explain. I'm going to try throughout every episode of this podcast to explain the feeling that comes with catching the fish that makes you happy every day, whether it's a world record class muskie, whether it's a state record class crappie, or whatever it is that swims in the waters that you fish. I want you to be motivated by that determination to continue to get out of bed early, to fish long hours, to seek out science, to seek out answers. It doesn't matter. But what I care about is that the feeling I get when I watch my boy smile, when he catches a fish of a lifetime, I don't want to ever lose that. And you guys, both of you, in a matter of speaking, have had an opportunity to contribute to the memories I have as a dad, to contribute to the memories that my son has as a budding angler. And I can't thank you enough for that. It means the world to me, and I want everyone else to have that experience as well. So, fellas, man hugs. I love you guys. I love what you do. I love the sport. I love the determination you guys have. And I'm going to give you one last word. And the last question I have, Cullen, let's start with you. If you want to become good at fishing, how important is time on the water?
Huge. Absolutely a giant part of it for sure. There's nothing better than
There's
hands-on, and
Mhm.
there's no better way to learn and get feedback.
Well, you get feedback if your clicker's going off, or if you troll for 28 hours straight and don't get the clicker to run
Yeah,
off. You're learning something. Always learning.
true.
Eric,
Yeah.
same to you.
And I would just say the world's full of sane people. Reject it. Don't be the same. Be obsessive. Pour everything into it. If you're a young person watching this right now, while all your buddies are going out on the weekends, fish, organize tackle, be nuts. Like it
That's
will.
what makes you different.
It will give back to you over and over and over again. Obsession is everything, and time on the water is what makes that possible.
It's a good way to live. Fellas, I can't thank you enough for the time you spent. I didn't set a time limit. Our good friend Marshall is making sure this is working. This went about 45 minutes long, but you know what? We've had passion-filled conversation. We've heard some great stories, and for that, I'm grateful. Hey, I want to thank Cullen Vieders. He is the owner-operator, the CEO of Musky Candies Customs. If you want to learn more about those baits, find his Facebook page. I think there's a website out there, Cullen. Is that true? What's the website?
There was. I just could never really keep it stocked, so I really don't. But you can just Google Musky Candies. It'll bring up the Instagram. It'll bring up tons of forums. Bring up the Facebook, all that stuff. So I might get back into the website thing because I do got a bunch of clothes and stuff coming. But for a while there, I just got away from it, I think.
Yeah, but you're super responsive, and I guess social media is kind of that balance. It doesn't matter if you're
Yeah.
on a website or not, because you answer text messages, you're on the website. So it's Musky Candies Customs. You can find him on Facebook. Eric Allee, and I'm going to get this right this time. He is the content marketing coordinator. That sounds right. He's from Eagle Claw, and Eagle Claw is one of the most common brands in fishing. They connect you to the trophy that you might catch, and I know that having a guy like Eric behind the curtain there at Eagle Claw it provides confidence. You know for a fact when you walk into any fishing tackle retailer, you're probably going to find Eagle Claw products, and you know that there's a guy that cares about making sure that fish gets stuck, making sure he stays stuck until you boat flip that state record crappie into your kayak, and do all the research you got to do that any obsessed guy has to do, just like Eric. I've enjoyed this conversation thoroughly. We're going to do this again. This has been In-Fisherman Storyline, and this is the Front Porch Edition. This is where we get collective minds together. This is where we get people that are different but have a similar vein running down the middle of their bodies called fishing. And I can't thank you enough for being here. We'll catch you next time. I'm Thomas Allen. This has been In-Fisherman Storyline Front Porch. See you here next time.